Welcome, folks. Welcome back to VulnCon 2024. Today, I am going to welcome Michael Windsor and Marta Rybczynska. I screwed it up already. 2 seconds. I screwed it up. I'm sorry, Marta. I really apologize. They're here to talk to us about effective vulnerability management for over 400 projects at the Eclipse Foundation. Before we get started, I'm just going to make a couple of announcements. Session surveys are available in the conference mobile app. Cell phones, as a courtesy, shut them off. If you got to make a call, step outside. I'll be closing the doors in a second here. And if you have questions, when we get to that point, raise your hand. I'll run around with a microphone. Or you could also drop them into Discord. I'll be relaying questions that I find in Discord. But wait until I get you a mic because everything's being recorded and streamed. And with that, turn it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. As said, I'm Michael Windsor, and with me is Marta Rybczynska. Marta, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Here we go. So I'm here today. I work with the Eclipse Foundation. I'm here because it's easy for me to get here. Marta is here. She's remote, but she's here because she knows what she's talking about. She has been leading our sort of vulnerability efforts across the Eclipse Foundation for quite a while now. I like to joke that, everybody's challenges themselves to pronounce her name. I am no better than anybody else. So I don't really pronounce it so much as mangle it. Just a caveat, Marta is currently in the south of France, which I know you're all feeling, oh, poor her. Her internet is currently competing with millions of people watching Netflix in the evening. So we'll see how that goes. Also, I think this is probably going to be the least vulnerability technical talk you will experience in this entire session. There's nothing vulnerable about what we're doing here. This is beyond clear because this is about humans and organizations, not software and technology. And that's really what makes it interesting for me, at least. So first, a little bit about the Eclipse Foundation. It is more than just the IDE. And in fact, it's a staggering number of different organizations are part of it, 20 different working groups and over 400 projects, 1,800 committers working on these projects. And here's something that's kind of unique about the Eclipse Foundation. Every one of those committers agrees to the committer agreement, and their name is part of that, who they are. It's not Fublat and Hacker23. These are people who either at their sponsor organizations or directly part of an agreement have agreed to that, and their name is part of it. From a software supply chain point of view, that has significant implications. We know our folks, and it's part of the culture of the organization. It's hard to kind of backfill that in other organizations, but it makes a difference. So I don't think I have to explain software supply chain security and why it's sort of been happening all along. Metaphorically, I think that, as an industry, we've been locking the front door better and better, still working on it, finding new holes in the front door, locking the back door against phishing attacks more and more, but now everything's coming in through the water supply, and they're persistent and nasty. But really, we've seen, within the Eclipse Foundation, 20 years of growth. We've gone from being the IDE to now dozens and dozens or hundreds of plugins that are part of the Eclipse ecosystem, and then a bunch of projects like software-defined vehicles, which is a huge number of things, IoT, Jakarta EE are all part of that. And so the surface area of the Eclipse Foundation and all the source code that's under its stewardship has increased dramatically. So that's actually, one development. Obviously, supply chain risk is all the cool hotness now and has become an increased risk for everybody to think about. And the processes that we had were all just cracking at the seams. Things that worked with, a few hundred developers working on one project just did not scale and work as we move forward. By the way, at any point in time, we might hear a disembodied voice of Marta. I've encouraged her to interrupt me when I say something stupid or wrong. Odds are good. So as that storm happened, all kinds of really unpleasant things happened. Notifications about vulnerabilities just got lost, right? The fixes would routinely fall through the cracks. And here's my favorite. Anyone and everyone, remember I mentioned 1,800 committers? They all had access to all the vulnerabilities, everything. There was just no sort of control permissions model like that. And of course, with 400 plus projects, they all worked exactly the same way, had well-established conventions from, oh no, I'm sorry. Everybody made it up. It was completely different. There was no consistency anywhere across that. And I think really the worst is that we were expecting everybody, and by expecting, I really mean implicitly expecting, to be a, whoever ended up holding the bag on a particular issue, to be a security expert and to have every project define and understand these processes without the necessary knowledge or experience. So this was real. Here are some lovely quotes from the field. These are the literally conversations that we had in early days with folks when vulnerabilities started showing up. And, the culture is, again, a key part of this. To many of the engineers on these projects, that's my bar. If it's not that, I don't want to talk about it. Or, and we've all heard this, and Michael Scavetta is chuckling at the middle one. If you care so much, fix it yourself. Jonathan, where are you? Similar conversation, exactly. So, it was really deeply culturally wired in terms of how the organization felt about things, and it wasn't in the direction we wanted to be. And so the Eclipse Foundation actually was looking at this problem and broadly, and the whole area of security in open source. And the Eclipse Foundation has a strong culture of governance. It works across many sort of continents and countries and so forth. And the board really decided they wanted to commit to making the Eclipse Foundation be the best place to develop open source software securely and to secure open source software. And so they, made that a high order objective. I think it was like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now. And then partnered with a project called Alpha Omega. Michael Scavetta will raise his hand. He and I worked together as sort of a joint Microsoft and Google effort, and now it's including Amazon, basically turning money into security and looking for ways to do that and see what worked. And we were able to provide funds to the Eclipse Foundation to form the Eclipse Foundation Security Team. So it hadn't existed before. The team has been growing steadily. There's now 5 people. Marta was one of the first hires. And as always the case, she was working on some other project and had opinions about security. And the lead, Mika, said, all right, why don't you come over here and fix things here? And she couldn't run away fast enough, apparently. So, and that's, culturally, if you want to change how your organization is working and thinking about security, you actually have to have people whose job it is to worry about that. And that sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed at how often it doesn't play out the way you'd like it. So just to kind of make it a little bit more concrete, here's a lovely example of a particular CVE. I don't even remember the specifics. Marta can probably give you more details. But just to make this perfect, this CVE was actually, something that had been happening for a while. And in fact, it happened in 2017, 2021. But of course, we didn't actually know when it came through because we couldn't find any of the old logs or information. Everything was just ad hoc at the time. And so at the time when we're starting to roll out new processes, we were sort of, building the airplane and the undercarriage while coming in for a landing. It was quite exciting. Everyone, and Michael in particular, will be shocked to know that this involved parsing XML. I generally rant, anybody who's writing a parser should be taken up back. So right away, the cultural differences between what the security team was trying to do and what the IDE team sort of thought of and what made for a CVE became acute. And then getting prioritization of work around that was super complicated. Then you add to the fact that this piece of code that was a problem had been copy-pasted across every plugin in the ecosystem. And so now you had even more people to talk to, even though it was the same damn code everywhere. I could go on for literally days of all the things that we talked about in terms of what come up to this. Another beautiful one is there was no separate CI for security fixes. So every security fix is going through, might as well be in the same public view as publishing everything at the same time. And these are like small things, but they all add up to being a lot of work to change and fix. I think also the versioning, yeah, the versioning schemes between Eclipse IDE and the various plugins that are all affected by this were all inconsistent and differently for good and bad reasons. But then ultimately when various sort of things were published into bug databases and CVEs and which versions were affected, they got the wrong versions. And I believe Marta just celebrated just recently, like several years later, we finally now have most of the versions corrected in the various databases. So it's easy to start. It's not easy to make it work. So where are we going? How are we thinking about this? And I think the most important starting point is, in order to do this well, it has to be easy to do and boring, mundane. And that again sounds obvious, but when you go walk into the field and talk to organizations and talk to individual developers, there's a fear of like, no, that's a bug. It's not a CVE or something. And the thing sort of, and it gets, people want to treat CVEs as like major exception handling things. And again, from an engineering point of view, I think exceptions are horrible. I like Go, but in real life, exceptions are horrible, right? Because that means that all your normal escalation processes are failing out. And if people think of them as something, oh, I wouldn't want to have that, that's going to cause bad things to happen. You're already 1 foot out the door into trouble. So how do we think about it? Well, we think about it, honestly, starting from the humans again. And we look at the different major roles of humans in this whole space, starting with the researchers. So prior to our work, researchers could and had to figure out how to contact somebody to tell them about a vulnerability they found. And there were so many different ways that they would find it. There was no consistent mechanism. You certainly couldn't email security@eclipse.org and expect that to go well. You certainly couldn't look at a secure.md file somewhere in a repo. It was everything. And so predictably, it went everywhere and nobody knew anything at all. Also, the comms they were getting back were inconsistent. So we really wanted to make sure that when a researcher comes in, they have a really positive experience in terms of clear, expectable, predictable behavior. Thank you for your report. We'll get back to you in 24 hours with our initial assessment, et cetera. And again, I have opinions here, but like researchers want credit. They want to know that they're like that. Now, we could talk about the incentives that are in that space, and they are perhaps perverse, but at the end of the day, this is the game we're playing. I'm talking to you, Jonathan. And so, again, that's part of what we think of as the right experience for researchers. Now, when we look at the maintainers, they don't want credit. They want this to go away, but they want tools, right? Consistent ways for them to manage their vulnerabilities because they don't want to go off. Well, actually, some of them do want to go off and invent their own. We don't want them to, and we want it to be boring and simple. And we also have to think about sort of a tiered assistance model. Some projects are very new. This is literally their first time they've ever had a CVE. They're all excited. It's a party going on, or it's total mayhem. And other ones are seasoned. They have a process and they've established it because, you know, these projects are, as you'd expect, groups, consortiums of organizations and developers working together, and they have their own governance model of what they're doing, and they work inside the framework of the Eclipse Foundation. They don't work for us. They don't, you know, they're not the boss of me is a normal response. And so figuring out the right touch to be in touch with them, to help them support the process, and to make sure that they're both getting better as long as they do it and also not causing interesting problems along the way. Let me just think about, is there anything else I want on the tools? No, I think that's pretty good. And then the users, whether they are downstream projects that are dependent on this particular thing and understanding its role in their world, a particular CVE, or whether they are end users of a product. Eclipse is in a situation where there's a little bit of both. How do people parse these reports, clear CVEs? And again, when they're written in a variety of ways and there's no editorial voice whatsoever, it can mean a lot of different things and be interpreted a lot of different ways, you know, like CVSS scores, which are so reliably helpful in everything we want to do. And, you know, we would love to get to a place where people can actually have an understandable VEX statement, even a machine readable eventually, that helps them manage what's happening in their impact zone, how they're handling what the risk upstream from them is. So that's all vision. We're not anywhere close to having that all done, but that's sort of the direction we want to go and how we think about this. And you'll notice I talked very little about the tools, A, because I don't know much about them, and B, because they're not important. They're a means to the end about the humans and the transformation of the humans that we're working on. And so let's just get this out front. This is hard. There are humans involved. If ever you've dealt with more than 5 humans, you realize that there are 7 directions that those 5 humans are pulling you in, right? They have priorities. There are things they're working on right now. There are things that they want to do, and there are things they don't want to do. There's things they know how to do, and whatever. So it starts by having expertise. You need to have people who know what they're doing here, but those people can't just go in there and say, I'm the security expert. Let me tell you how this is done. That'll work really badly. And you have to build trust. And trust is built one conversation, one situation, one relationship, one team at a time. And it's going to take a long time across those 1,800 committers for everybody to know their place in the world, how they fit in, how that helps them, and where to get resources they need, and where to trust what they hear from other people. And it takes patience. I think I've said this about 20 times. People I've worked in other contexts also very familiar with the long timelines that these things take. There's just a calendar time problem. No mythical man-month possibilities here. of just the amount of time it takes to change processes. And one way to think about that is, people have existing processes in place that have been working for them for any given value of working for a while. And those things are comfortable and they have lots of inertia. And they're predictable. They know how this is going to play out. So when you come in with a new process, I keep doing side jabs. It's like rewriting something in Rust. It's not going to make it all okay out of the box, right? It might be a better place at the end, but you've got a journey to get there, to get to the maturity and robustness of what was there before. And so the humility to do that well requires a lot of patience for everybody involved. And again, from a resourcing point of view, there's a lot of work here. This is net new. Even if a team had nothing there before to replace, it's a bunch of net new. And if they had something there to replace, it's the other kind of net new, which is you have to somehow not break the old thing while building the new thing. It takes a lot of energy and work. And the teams that you're working with haven't budgeted that. They haven't budgeted the change, or they haven't budgeted the addition of the new things. And so there's just prioritization work that takes time to work across a bunch of organizations. Jordan, what's that like at Google? It's easy, he says. He lied. Yeah. So when Marta told me a story, and I'll steal her thunder because she's probably dying of internet hell. But one of the teams that we were working with thought that we were still like, oh, the original tracker that we used was a Bugzilla instance that everybody had access to. And one of the teams had reasonably observed they didn't like Bugzilla and didn't think that was a good place to do it and didn't like this. So they decided, even after we'd switched to the new system, that they were not going to use that for assigning CVEs. They didn't really like it, so they just decided to use their own internal tracker. So they had an internal company tracker where they worked, and they used that instead for the CVEs, as opaque as it could be to the rest of the organization. That's going to happen to you as you scale out your work. Maybe not that exact thing, but anyway, how am I doing on time? Pretty well. Okay. So this should be motherhood and apple pie, very simple, very obvious, and yet it's amazing how powerful stating the obvious is. So we want to have a very consistent thing, and we're on our way towards this, where the request, the report comes in. And already we have an interesting challenge, because reports can come in through our front door of security@eclipse.org, or they can come in through GitHub vulnerability reporting, or they can come in through some GitLab thing, or because somebody knows somebody and emails them. Even just gathering the ones from the different reporting tools, so we don't have a single GitHub organization. We have literally dozens, or if not hundreds of them. And so we have to pull from each one of those things and pull them in together and aggregate those into a single place so that we can then do the first level of triage. And the security team does the first level of triage, looks at it, and essentially decides, is this even worth talking to, quick rejection or no, or whatever we're talking about, and gets to the point where we then figure out which project is involved, because shock, not every time we get one of these is it correctly assigned to the right project, right? Our org structure and our project structure are complicated, and so people might get the wrong project, and we have to figure out where it belongs and which ones are affected. That is seldom a simple process, and it's seldom a one-time deal either. And so at that point, we've identified as a legitimate vulnerability. We figure we know who needs to get to it. And so at that point, we are starting to create the issue and assigning that issue towards the teams involved, and also notifying the researcher in question, and giving them an opportunity to join the GitLab ticket. So we use a GitLab confidential issues tool for managing them, and we invite them to that ticket so they can watch along and see the progress of the work happening. And we're now handing off to the team. Jonathan, you appreciating that? Right. So for the studio audience who can't hear the lack of microphone there, as researchers, when you don't have that, you can't see the progress, you don't know where you stand, it's frustrating. So then at that point, we're sort of handing it off to the development team or teams, and for them to go off and dig deeper, do the analysis. And at that time, also, the CVE is sort of being created as a ticket. It's not being published at this point in time. And then magic engineering work, developer fix is ready. And of course, it's never that simple, because you might have backports to do with old versions and things like that. But we're starting to pull the machine together. And so the ready is actually really a fan out of a whole bunch of async and promise type things coming back together. And eventually we feel like we are ready, all clear from all the various stakeholders. We have dealt with coordinated disclosure, coordinated releases, coordinated all this and that. And then it's time to publish a CVE and publish the whole story and push out the outcomes. That is the ideal workflow. Again, feedback welcome, and we're not where we want to be all the way there, but pretty good. So where are we? And again, Marta will jump in as I mangle this. We are making good progress. We've done a bunch of migration work. We've set up permissions on the GitLab confidential issues. We have policies in place. We have a developer handbook, which I'll spend a link to at the end. We have, let me think what else I'm missing on this. We have private reporting enabled on GitHub, on many, but not all of our GitHub repos. We have a triage and escalation process in place and documented. So there's a lot of stuff that's coming together, and we've done developer training at the last Eclipse conference in Germany. Marta and others ran a specific training program for Eclipse developers to learn how this works across the foundation. So I think that we're making good progress. A lot of documentation is happening, but I don't want to pull any punches. There's a long road ahead. I don't think that we have really solved the problem of reducing the burden on the committers or even the project maintainers. There's still a lot of work for them to do, and it's still arcane or specialized work that we need them to be good at. We still have tooling issues because our source code lives across GitLab and GitHub in hundreds of organizations and repos, and that's problematic. Ideally, we're going to get to a point where we have metrics tracking this, where we can think about an SLO in terms of our response time to researchers and what we think how long it should take to get to each stage of that thing. Obviously, it's software, everything's variable, but like, what are the norms and how do we feel about them? We are not yet in a point where we have regular onboarding and training exercises for developers. Like to get to that too, because again, nobody needs backup, they need recovery. Doing it every day, you don't know how. And we, I think, still need to do more work culturally, technically, and process-wise on sort of handling of CVEs in our upstream dependencies, right? Things that we depend upon, and we need to figure out how to sort of manage that in our world. So it hasn't been clear, right? One of the Google values of thriving in ambiguity is one of my favorite phrases, and it really applies here. We have been adapting. We will continue to adapt as we're going along. Everything I just talked about is aspirational, but the realities are going to be somewhat different along the way. And, but that sort of going back to that normalization, making it boring, we want to normalize our approach. We want it to become just a thing that everybody understands. It's predictable, it's boring, it's hopefully easy. And we are working closely with our central IT organization that runs common infrastructure, as well as with the individual projects and maintainers to just get there one day at a time. It is a journey. We'd like to have an ongoing discussion. So we've actually set up a discussion group. The CSI is the cybersecurity something team. I can't remember the name. I can never remember the name of the team, but that's the Eclipse security team. And so we've set up this space. We'd love to have an ongoing conversation. If you have thoughts about anything we're doing from a security point of view, but notably in this conversation here around vulnerability management at scale, please jump in and go in there. We just set that up just in response to this thing. And if you're interested, we would be interested in hosting a quarterly roundtable, something we've done in other contexts, with security researchers and people who are interested in sort of how to work with the Eclipse Foundation or whatever there. I think it'd be a valuable conversation as well. But researchers, maintainers, consumers, anybody could sort of come to that. If you want our handbook, which is hard to read, but you can guess the URL from there, and just scan the QR code. There'll be nothing in there that could possibly harm anybody. Joke aside, they actually asked me to bring a USB drive and stick it in here for my slides. You can't make this stuff up. And with that, and with thanks from Marta for not jumping in or actually not needing to, thank you very much. And we have a few minutes for questions.
Yep, got about 5 minutes for questions.
We're going to explicitly exclude Jonathan until the end. Only if there's nobody else. Oh, those guys too. Sorry.
Hello, I have the microphone, so you can't stop me. How do you think, do you apply the same process for the more mundane work of like bumping dependencies as well? Or is this just for things that researchers report directly?
So that's a great question. I think that we're sort of separating the source hygiene from the vulnerability response process. I think ultimately, getting projects to live closer to head or be patched with their dependencies as a proactive measure is another aspect of what the security team thinks about and is doing. And again, we have very different sort of characteristics, even the projects themselves. So one of the things that we're working on right now is actually better defining our project lifecycle in terms of the status of a project, because there are things in the Eclipse Foundation that are very old code that we don't even care about you reporting vulnerabilities on, right? They're not going to get fixed. And if you think you found a new vulnerability, please get in line of a long list of things and you should not be using this code. So there's work across the whole software supply chain and sort of security aspects that we're working on, including hardening our infrastructure. That is another dimension. And you can go everything from where the Tamarin project is like reproducible builds and is checking the crypto keys on their upstream dependencies to other projects that are just nowhere near there.
I will jump in this one because we actually had situations where someone reported that a project has an outdated dependency that has a vulnerability. It even happened that that was the developer of the upstream that notified that one of our projects needs to be updated. And that, in that case, we used absolutely the security process as usual. We haven't scaled that up to the automatic updates of all of the dependencies that we may have. Some of the projects have like hundreds of dependencies, of course. But if it happens, especially for a big issue, yeah, we go the normal security process also.
Yay, Marta. All right, Jonathan. You got
They gave me the
60 seconds.
microphone. Bum,
Yeah.
bum, bum. So you talk about how you want to make vulnerability reporting process boring. Which
I want to make our handling of it boring.
yeah, by handling, especially with the stuff that's like rote, right? Like, you know, click the merge button on the dependabot pull request, right? Like that, sure, great. But like a lot of the researchers get into it because it's a little exciting. Like there's an exciting aspect of vulnerability research. Do you have any insights into, for the people that actually have to engage in it, creating an environment where it is something that is maybe not exciting, but it's something pleasurable to engage in, that, like, you know, not just a boring experience, but also something that people actually find a little bit of joy in being a part of?
I think there's a huge difference between roller coaster exciting, cold, being dumped in a cold ice freezing lake and soaking into a nice hot, warm bath. And I think that we're going for comfort here. I think that you can derive your excitement from finding really cool things and stuff like that. But when it hits our space, we don't want that excitement. I glossed over it, but again, culturally, there's a strong resistance to having things be treated as CVEs. So one of the notes I forgot to talk about was there's a lot of bugs still happening that are actually CVEs that are, or should be, but are not being declared because the engineers don't want to call it a CVE. They just want to call it a bug. And so in our current new processes, but we've only seen 20 CVEs or so over a certain period of time, but there have been dozens of bugs, probably more, that really legitimately would have been that, but the engineering teams did not want to make that call because it felt like that would be bad or whatever, right? And that's where I'm going from a sort of a normalization point of view.
But I wonder if that's the goal would be to reduce the frequency of the chaos. You'll never be at zero. There's always in my world anyway, my goal is similar to yours in that I want to bring a sense of normalcy to this. I want there to be a mundane set of practices, but I also know that there will always be the high profile, the hot topics, the chaos that will, kind of get the juices flowing and get everybody excited about it. So
I think that,
but reducing that would be awesome.
I go back to like incident management done well, right? You have a process there. You have people who do this every day. So for them, they've done an incident, and Google again is a good example. Like they've done this every day for the past 5 years. So they're not excited about this role. They are disciplined about the role and they know what they're doing, right? The excitement on the outside is exactly like when you're watching a hockey game, it looks really cool and everything's exciting there. And the production team is behind the scenes doing things by predictable patterns. They've automated most of the things, et cetera. And so I think that's where I want to be. Have your fun on the outside. On the inside, we're a smooth machine purring along, and it'll still be crazy. You're totally right. But, that's not where we want to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy I always use is that like we're firefighters. We know how to fight a fire. We know all the right things to do, but every fire is different.
Yep. So I think we're at time.
We're at time, yes.
Thank you very much. Again, thanks to Marta for coming in this evening from France. And again, thanks very much for showing up.